Hello Marvel fans, my name is Francis and welcome to my channel. So we got some pretty big news a few days ago from IGN related to Marvel revisiting Spider-Man the Animated Series, which is a show that I hold near and dear to my heart, as it's basically, like for many other Spider-Man fans, it's the show that got me into the character when I was just a kid. And a couple of years ago, before X-Men 97 came out, I made a video talking about what I would love to see if the show ever got revived on Disney+. And while the 90s Spider-Man did have two non-speaking cameos in X-Men 97, it doesn't seem that Disney and Marvel are ready to commit to giving Spider-Man the X-Men 97 treatment. Instead, they want to continue with more seasons of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which that's fair enough. The first season was pretty great, and there's a lot of potential that show has going forward. And then all of a sudden, the news broke that Marvel wants to do a Spider-Man the Animated Series comic follow-up called Spider-Man 94. It's going to take place after the finale of the original show and resolve what happened to Mary Jane, while also introducing two of Spider-Man's villains from the comics that have not debuted in the animated series' continuity yet. We even got two variant comic covers to go along with this announcement, one of which is a reference to one of the issues in Spider-Man Maximum Carnage, and it looks really good. It's like whenever you see Venom with those red and blue highlights, you instantly think of the 90s version of the character. The second cover is also really cool, but it also reveals one of the villains that's going to be appearing in this story, and that's Morlun. I'm intrigued to see what his introduction will be like. Judging from the synopsis that was released, I imagine Peter and Mary Jane will reunite very quickly and get back to New York, and Morlun will probably end up following them back to their home dimension. That's part of the fun of bringing back these 90s superhero shows and then injecting newer characters from the comics to see how would they have worked if they did actually exist all the way back then in the 90s. I mean, I doubt he's going to be as crazy as 616 Morlun, who swallowed one of Spider-Man's eyeballs, but it is still fun to speculate how he'll be reimagined as a villain for the 90s version of Spider-Man. But now let's dig deep into who the creative team behind this comic is. Jim Tao is serving as the primary artist for this book, which I'm not familiar with his work, but I'm eager to see what he can bring to it. So while I was making this video, some interior artwork for the first issue did actually get released. The biggest thing to come out of this reveal, narratively, for me, is the debut of Kane Parker in the 90s continuity. And this is so cool to see because the return of Hydro Man two-parter ended with laying the groundwork for him to appear. And even Molten Man gets a cameo, which is kind of cool considering Liz's brother didn't really appear in the original series. So that's technically 3 villains that are being introduced in this revival comic. I understand that there's been somewhat of a mixed reaction to the artwork, and I mean there's some parts of the artwork that I do like. I mean, Mary Jane and Aunt May at least somewhat look like their characters, and you know, Aunt May's house still looks like, from what we can see of it, it still looks like the same house. Most of the complaints are related to the way Peter is drawn, which yes, I get to some degree. Sure, he's not as bulky as he was in the original series, and Peter's facial features look a bit weird, but I don't really think the artwork is as bad as people are making it out to be. I mean, this is only like a couple of pages. I think my biggest gripe with how the artwork looks is more to do with the colours. The first set of panels show Spider-Man and Mary Jane back in New York, and I assume a lot of this is going to be Peter catching her up to speed on what she's missed. And because it all takes place at night time, this is where my complaint with the colours comes in, because in the original series, the shade of red in Spider-Man's costume whenever he's swinging around at night time, that was more of a magenta red colour. Here it's just kind of a bog standard red. And yes, I know this is nitpicky because X-Men 97 also showed Spidey at night time and the shade of red wasn't magenta. I'm willing to give X-Men a pass on that, considering it's just him popping up in their show briefly, but since this comic is supposed to be treated as a continuation of the original show, a part of me wishes the colours remained a bit more consistent with the actual show. When it comes to writing duties, there was a brief moment before before I found out who it was where I was a little bit worried as who was going to write this. You know, if they had hired someone who didn't work on the original series at all as a writer, that would have instantly killed my hype for this, because then that makes you think, well, it's just going to be fan fiction. But thankfully, it's being written by J.M. DeMatteis, who wrote the iconic Kraven's Last Hunt storyline and even helped write an episode of the original series. I think it was the first part of the Mutant Agenda two-parter, which is the X-Men crossover. So having him on board for me served as instant good news, because it's J.M. DeMatteis. He's written so much for Spider-Man, you just instantly know the book is going to be in safe hands. However, with all that being said, I did find it initially confusing that John Semper Jr., the original showrunner, was not hired to write this book, considering he has already written what is essentially his own episode 66, where Peter finds Mary Jane in an alternate Victorian England, and he even faces off against a Jack the Ripper version of Carnage. Which I know some fans are mixed on, because I think some people just didn't vibe with the setting in which it takes place, but to be honest, when do you ever get to see Spider-Man placed in that type of time period? If anything, it raises the stakes of the story because he has to adapt to it in order to save Mary Jane. But anyway, knowing that J.M. DeMatteis worked with John Semper Jr. on the original series made me initially think that, okay, maybe J.M. DeMatteis intends to acknowledge John's plans but also sidestep them so he can tell his own story. But then John Semper Jr. put out a post reacting to the news and pretty much saying he was not contacted to be involved in this story at all by Marvel. And look, there's no bad blood between John Semper Jr. and DeMatteis. They clearly have a lot of respect for each other. The frustrating thing about all this is Marvel's continued inability to credit John for his massive contributions to the Spider-Man franchise. His show originally introduced the concept of Dr. Octavius being a mentor figure to Peter Parker. The show also introduced the idea that when the symbiote is bonded to Peter, it will change his behaviour and make him more aggressive. And of course, we can't forget about the show's final episodes, which were basically the earliest Spider-Verse story done in practice before writer Dan Slott solidified the concept in the comics. I do genuinely believe Dan Slott when he says he didn't know about Spider-Wars when he wrote Spider-Verse and even worked on Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. And you know, when it comes to the special thanks sections of the Spider-Verse film's end credits, of course Dan Slott deserves to have his name listed in the credits, I'm not denying that. But for all of the Spider-Verse movies that have been released so far, including Spider-Man No Way Home, John Semper Jr. has not been credited once. And I remember when I saw No Way Home in cinemas and I got to the end credits, when I looked at the special thanks section and saw that John's name was absent, I genuinely thought that Marvel Studios, Disney and Sony should all be ashamed of themselves for the complete and utter disrespect they've shown John. Genuinely, how is it that the fans know that John deserves to be credited, and despite Marvel and Disney owning Spider-Man the Animated Series, they neglect to do so? It's just as frustrating on the Sony side of the equation. I know a lot of Spider-Man fans dislike Avi Arad for some of the decisions he pretty much forced into Spider-Man 3. Me personally, I'll give him this, right? He is responsible for saving Marvel from going bankrupt in the 90s. He deserves all the praise for that, and for helping many Marvel movies get made in the early 2000s. But the thing is, he was only involved in Spider-Man the Animated Series for one season, and after that he left John to do whatever he pleased with the show, and it got better and better. But when it came to picking the character, the Spot, as the villain for Across and Beyond the Spider-Verse, did he genuinely suggest that character to the writers because he loves the Spot from the comics, or did he watch those later episodes of Spider-Man the Animated Series that feature him, you know, the episodes Avi wasn't actively involved in, and those episodes are the real reason he encouraged that character's inclusion? Just speculation on my part, but who knows. Anyway, let's get get back on track regarding this Spider-Man 94 comic. The first issue is set to release on September 3rd, and this story as a whole will span across 4 issues. As to why the series is called Spider-Man 94 instead of Spider-Man 98, well, according to JMD Mateus, that was Marvel Editorial's decision, not his. I will say though, them calling it Spider-Man 94 does kind of make sense. I remember when Marvel was doing Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars back in 2015, and they had announced a bunch of different Battleworld tie-in comics. One of the new X-Men books to come out of this was X-Men 92, and so of course with that series having the number 92 being the year in which X-Men the animated series began, a lot of fans assumed that this was actually a continuation of the original show. But then we later found out that this series was set in its own continuity, completely detached from the narrative of X-Men the animated series. The creators were clearly inspired by the animated series, but the intention was also there to capture the show's vibe while also telling their own stories. So Spider-Man 94 might end up being in a similar situation. Although Marvel is marketing this as the true resolution to what happened to Mary Jane, it being official canon is ultimately up to the reader, you know, take it or leave it. I think there's obviously going to be room for some fans to class it as canon, at least until the series comes back in an official capacity on Disney+. For now, at this current point in time, I definitely believe that JMD Mateus has good intentions. You know, he's clearly doing this to show Marvel and Disney that there is still a demand for this version of Spider-Man. Even though Semper's not writing it, DeMatteis is still going to treat this as the next season of the show. And him going into this with that mentality makes me very intrigued to see how he's going to handle Peter and Mary Jane's relationship post returning her to New York. Because to me, that's actually quite interesting. In John Semper's Peter Finds Mary Jane script, we do see what happened to her and we do see the characters reunite, but how their relationship will work in the long term from that point onwards isn't really addressed. And I think this stuff is really important to delve into. In the final season, Peter married a clone of Mary Jane, and now that he's bringing back the real one, it's going to complicate things on a lot of levels, especially since she's kind of already married to him in a legal sense, despite having no memory of it because she wasn't the one that originally consented to it. Also, Peter, Madam Web and Miles Warren are the only ones that know she's been missing since the end of the 3rd season. The friends and families of Peter and MJ are still yet to find out that she was missing for much longer than they had originally thought. And more importantly, how is the real Mary Jane going to react to all this information about these events that she's missed out on? We'll just have to wait and see for what JMD Mateus has in store for us. Regardless of whether or not this book ends up being canon, I do still think we should support this. A, because it sends a clear message to Disney and Marvel that we want the show to come back, but also B, JMD Mateus is a great writer. He's also backing the idea that if Spider-Man 98 ends up happening, that John Semper should be the one showrunning it. I've also made my thoughts clear in my original pros and cons video that if Semper's not involved, then there's no point in making it. I mean, ideally, have John Semper Jr. as showrunner again, but also get JMD Mateus in to write a few episodes as well. And look, in the past I know I've expressed a lot of enthusiasm to see the Kraven's Last Hunt storyline adapted. I know a lot of people think that storyline wouldn't work for Spider-Man 98 considering Kraven is mostly a good guy in the 90s continuity. I do get where those people are coming from, but it's also important to remember that Spider-Man the animated series would very rarely adapt specific storylines from the comics. Sure, moments from the comics were loosely brought to life in some episodes, but the point is you wouldn't really see one-to-one adaptations. Even the 3rd season's finale adapting Turning Point, which is also the night that Gwen Stacy died, Gwen Stacy isn't even in it, nor does her substitute actually die. So that to me just serves as further proof that if Spider-Man 98 does happen, they can definitely adapt KLH even if it's not one-to-one. I know I'm basically rambling at this point, but here's the last thing I'll say when it comes to a revival show adapting stories from the comics. If the show actually does come back, then the number one story they need to do is Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. It's a story that would just work so well in the 90s Marvel animated universe. Pretty much all the major characters in that story have been established across Spider-Man and X-Men. The actual fights between Spider-Man and Juggernaut have the potential to look so awesome with what today's animators are capable of. Plus, the fan in me just knows that is the type of episode where I just know Christopher Daniel Barnes would deliver an amazing performance as Spider-Man. To have him go from being cheerful and confident at the start of the fight to then gradually getting more and more frustrated and desperate to win, as the original story went to such great lengths to show that Juggernaut really is unstoppable. Let's hope that Spider-Man 94 does sell well enough so that one day we could potentially see a story like that brought to life. So that's going to do it for this video. Thank you for tuning in if you made it this far. Let me know your thoughts on Spider-Man 94 and if you intend to read it. Once again, my name is Francis and I'll see you when I see you. Goodbye.